Artificial intelligence continues to gain traction, and some people look to these AI models for financial advice. So the question becomes, can AI help you with your retirement planning? So that's what we'll look at for the next couple of minutes here. I will ask it some common retirement planning questions, some of the most common questions I hear. We'll go over the answers, and then at the end, we'll cover some key takeaways about what it really means to look at this as a potential solution for your retirement planning. While artificial intelligence is problematic in a number of different ways, it is very powerful. You can just communicate with a computer in natural language, and it will answer in natural language almost instantly. These models are available at any hour of the day, and they might be available to people who are unable or unwilling to hire a financial advisor. Plus, it's going to have somewhat objective information. So it's not necessarily going to enter its judgment into the advice it gives you. So if you think that you want to retire earlier or later, or take Social Security sooner or later, it's not necessarily going to have its own opinions on that. It will just give you information. So the question becomes, how good is that information? So I started with what is basically an impossible question to answer without more details. I said I have 1 million in pre-tax retirement accounts, 24,000 in Social Security, and I want to spend 50,000 per year after tax. Is it enough? So the model spits out an answer, and it does a good job of saying, let's start with some basic assumptions because that's important. And it's going to assume age 65 with a life expectancy of 85. Now, right off the bat, that does cause me a little bit of concern because we're only planning for a 20-year retirement. The thing is that maybe 85 is a reasonable life expectancy. In fact, that is based on some data somewhere. However, for most people, especially those, for example, who might have several 100,000 or more saved up for retirement, there's a decent chance that you would live longer than that. You could also end up with a much shorter lifespan due to health issues or accidents or other unknowns. But when we're planning for retirement, what I find is most people want to maybe plan for the best. So in this case, I think the assumption of age 85 is a little bit too simplistic. It might be based on some data tables, but it doesn't take into account the reality of, number one, what happens with a lot of people, and number two, what a lot of clients want. They don't want to just run out of money after 20 years. They want to be able to fund a longer life. Another thing that comes up is this investment return, and I'm not entirely sure what it's getting at, but it says, let's assume average annual returns of 5% after adjusting for inflation. So if inflation is 3% in the line above, that suggests to me that it's saying 5% real returns, or in other words, it would be an 8% return on your investments, and then you take away the 3% for inflation. Once again, that may very well happen, but the thing is that for a lot of people planning for retirement, they're in their 60s or late 50s, they don't necessarily want to plan for those 8% type returns. That might not be the reality in the remaining years they have in their life, and especially in those years when they're taking big withdrawals from their retirement savings. Then the model goes through a couple of calculations and talks about a few other things, but what I do like is ultimately it says that things may vary and we just don't know for sure what's going to happen. Next, I asked ChatGPT how much I should convert to Roth this year out of my pre-tax assets. This one was interesting because it did give some nice tips here. These are all important things to think about. What I've noticed here is that it doesn't necessarily include IRMA, or the fact that you might have to pay higher Medicare premiums if your income gets above certain levels. And so while these are good reasons to convert or consider conversions, it doesn't include the IRMA, which I think is a really important one. Another important one that I think is lacking here is the so-called widow's tax trap. And that might come up when you have two people, particularly a married couple, but not necessarily. They've got pre-tax assets, each of them in their own name. And then when one of the people dies, the other inherits all of that money. And then suddenly they have a large pre-tax asset that they need to take these RMDs off of, or those required minimum distributions. They're essentially forced to take a lot of taxable income each year, and that can cause problems, once again, with those Medicare premiums and your Social Security taxation and other things. And that is not mentioned here. So I think that would be worth adding for the next time the computer answers this question. Now, the answer I got was pretty vague, and I wanted more detailed and personalized information, so I added a few specific details. I said I want to avoid paying IRMA, that's that Medicare surcharge or the extra costs when your income gets too high, and I said, I think my income will be about $60,000 this year, so how much should I convert? This got really interesting because one of the things to note here is it says, as of my last knowledge update in January of 2022, and then it lists some IRMA thresholds. And of course, those are behind. So it mentions 91,000 as the target top income level if you want to avoid paying IRMA surcharges. Now, the 91,000 didn't come out of thin air. It is a historical figure. But what this tells you is that ChatGPT and similar models are not necessarily up to date. So if it's important to get the numbers right, you need to triple check that and just make sure that you're getting current numbers as you make your decisions. Another thing I'm noting here is that it would be really helpful for it to tell you that the IRMA levels are a cliff. So if you go over by $1, you will end up paying the full extra surcharge. So you have to be really careful. It's a little bit better to underdo it than to overdo it. And I think that would be very useful information for people who are asking this question. Another thing I would love to see mentioned here is the fact that you might want to make estimated tax payments or consider withholding, but most likely estimated tax payments out of your taxable funds, because as you make Roth conversions, you generate additional income, and the IRS wants you to pay taxes as you go so you don't owe, as they say. So if you're at risk of any underpayment penalties, this is something that could catch you by surprise. It would be really easy to add that to this information. That's important for you to know. The nice thing about ChatGPT is you can kind of continue on as if it's a conversation. So I added to my previous question and I said, well, so does that mean that I could do 31,000? Again, based on those older out-of-date figures. And again, with some dancing around, it eventually gets to an answer of yes, that would be about the figure you'd aim for is 31,000. But once again, it's not keeping in mind that there is a cliff that you maybe don't want to go right up to the edge. You might want to leave a little margin of safety as you calculate your amount. The next question is about where to draw funds from in retirement. So you might have various buckets, including pre-tax retirement accounts, Roth type accounts, and then those individual or joint brokerage accounts that are taxable. So which is best to pull from? Once again, it starts out with some general information and says, well, it kind of depends, and here are some things to think about, which is probably good to do. And while we're not going to pick apart every little thing here, I would really disagree with number one on tax efficiency there. It's going to tell you to start by spending down those taxable accounts first. So your individual and joint brokerage accounts, for example. That might be right in some cases, but in a lot of other cases, especially when clients come to me, what I see is that it can make sense to draw from their pre-tax accounts and maybe even convert money from pre-tax accounts to Roth type accounts so it can later be tax-free money. And what happens is if you hold off on drawing down that pre-tax money, it just continues to grow. Those accounts can get quite large. And then when you eventually have to take distributions, remember the IRS does not let you leave money in those pre-tax accounts indefinitely. When you have to take distributions from those accounts, they can be so large that the distributions mess up your income. They cause you to have so much income that you pay more for Medicare, Social Security taxation, and other complications arise. I do like that suggestion to have a cash cushion. That can be helpful, especially when there's a sharp market downturn. But when we get to Social Security timing, once again, I have some issues here. And what it's saying is that it reduces the need to draw from your retirement accounts early in retirement if you delay Social Security. I'm not sure that makes sense. In fact, I think it's the opposite. For me, I would view it as if you delay Social Security, you're going to actually draw from your pre-tax and other savings at a faster rate. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Again, perhaps you want to really draw down those pre-tax accounts, and there might be benefits of doing that in years when you have a low income and before Social Security starts. It can make a lot of sense to do that. Then, once Social Security kicks in, you can dramatically reduce the amount you're taking out. That's what's known as a Social Security bridge strategy. And I've got a video on that if you want to learn more. So once again, I asked it a clarifying question. And again, you can have a conversation like this, and you can even say please and thank you if you want to be polite. You don't have to, but maybe it's nice to be nice to the robots in case they take over the world someday. Anyway, I asked, wouldn't it make sense to draw down my pre-tax balances early? And it does acknowledge that there might be some benefits of doing that. So again, the thing is that you have to know what to ask. And that's really important. It's more of a validation tool at this point, and it's a somewhat out of date tool for people who are already savvy enough to know what questions to ask and what follow-up questions to ask. By the way, I'm Justin Pritchard, and I help people plan for retirement and invest for the future. And in the description below, you're going to find some additional resources. This is general retirement planning information. I think you'll find it very helpful. And this is time for a quick reminder. It's just a short video. Can't possibly cover everything in this. So what can we learn from this short exercise? One takeaway, I think, is that AI has a lot of information, but it doesn't necessarily have wisdom. And I'd credit Robert Powell with that, who is part of the RMA curriculum, for putting it in those words. I think that's really helpful, that it can tell you a lot of things, but it won't necessarily look at your situation or add additional helpful tips or color commentary that really might be necessary. That said, it continues to get smarter every day, so we can only expect things to improve when it comes to getting answers to questions like this. Now, if you're using AI, I'd love to hear how you're doing it and how it's going for you. And if you found this video helpful, please leave a quick thumbs up. Thanks and take care.